Well, welcome to you today, parents. My name is Bob Brennan, and you're watching Parents Living in Hope. In this channel, what we do is we help parents who are dealing with children or family members who are struggling with gender issues, struggling with gender confusion. They're really sorting out their gender identity. And so we help parents and families navigate this process, leading to healing and reconciliation within the family so that a healthy gender identity can be developed. Today, I'm addressing the topic of the healing perspective. Now, the reason this is important is because parents, especially in the early stages after disclosure of a gender identity or a gender direction, are obviously very concerned, very afraid often, and they're focusing on these issues that are a part of the gender confusion. At this stage, parents are focusing on the child in terms of this as a problem that they are dealing with, the gender identity. And so most parents want to kind of get this straightened out. Maybe you want to get some help from me or others where they can get things sorted out with their child. And they hold often a perspective, a very biblical perspective, that this is not what God has ordained, and so this is not right for their child. While this is a very natural kind of perspective and concern and focus for parents, ultimately we want to look at how to look at your child, what to focus on with your child that's going to make a difference and create an environment of healing for them. So we have the natural response, which is normal for every parent, and then we have the effective response. So today we're looking at this from the perspective of how can you look at your child? What can you focus on in your child that can lead to a process of healing for them? Every gender confusion issue has as its underlying current, if you will, or underlying product, gender confusion. So this comes from pain, this comes from wounding, many other things, but the pain and wounding are really the issues that we focus on because those are most often present and usually the things that we have to deal with one way or the other. So let's talk about creating this healing perspective. First of all, what a parent needs to do is realize how you are focusing on your child, focusing on this problem that they have and trying to find a solution for them. Or in some cases, trying to kind of straighten them out, tell them the truth and those kinds of things. And those are fine. However, those actions will not change their gender identity because their gender identity is not based on strictly the way they think about themselves, but it is rooted in underlying pain that needs to be dealt with. So what we're learning to do in focusing on the child is move away from looking at them or their problem to really what the real focus needs to be in order to generate a path of healing. And so what this requires is for a parent to first look at themselves in order to make this shift. We have to look at ourselves and say, what are our fears as a parent? What are your fears as a parent? Now, there's obvious fears about this that are, again, very normal for every parent to have. What's going to happen to my child in terms of relationships? How are they going to potentially be hurt by presenting themselves in the way they are, where they want to be, what they think they are in terms of their gender identity, how they might be hurt even on social media, rejection, these kinds of things. But it goes beyond that, too, in terms of your fears related to, will my child be married to the opposite sex and have a family and ultimately have grandchildren for you. I mean, these are very real fears that we expect and are very normal kinds of fears when this issue comes up. So we want to be able to acknowledge these things for yourself, acknowledge your fears, even write them down and talk about them. Because when you can deal with your fears related to this, then you're going to be able to shift into a place of a healing perspective that's going to eventually have a positive impact on your child. So once we look at these fears that we have, we need to begin to accept the fact that we cannot change our child. In the past, in dealing with your child as a child, you may have an impact on their behavior and their direction and even their way of thinking. But by now, especially if they're probably in an adolescent or an adult stage, they have a will, they have a choice, and you as a parent are not going to move that will, right? So we need to accept the idea that you are not going to be able to change them. Now this is a great loss, right? Because this is dealing with our fears. Our fears are that something won't happen, that their life will not turn out right. And we're actually looking at the reality that you cannot change this. This is very disempowering and a very helpless and sometimes hopeless feeling. But this is part of grieving this loss, that you can't change them and that they may be this way. Now, we're not encouraging that, and we don't want them to continue to be this way. But we need to surrender our sense of control, because when you do that, then this is going to position you to be able to have an influence on them that's going to make a difference. And again, this is part of creating this healing environment. You have to remember that wounds in young children and adolescent are really producing, they are the source or the root that manifests itself in gender confusion. It is this pain or wounding. We really see this in the form of the transgender movement, where hormones are taken and surgeries are happening because this person has a gender dysphoria, believing that they are the opposite sex in the wrong body, and they get a gender reassignment surgery, and they find out that it doesn't really provide relief in the way that they were hoping to. This is because this is not based on the physical characteristic or how you feel about yourself in terms of gender, but this is based on how these wounds impact the way that we feel about our gender, the way we feel about ourselves as a man or a woman. So these are some things that we want to consider. We want to focus. Here's the shift. Here's the shift of what we're shifting into in your focus of your child as a wounded person. Okay, they are a wounded person. You may not see this every day. You may not see, they may not appear to be suffering in any way, but wounds go under the skin in a sense. They're internally stored within us, and yet they are continuing to feed us with those pains, whatever suffering that child has gone through. Some of those wounds and pains you may not really even be aware of. They may not even be aware of them. Sometimes they're very subtle things, and this is part of our process of working with these young men and women in terms of their own healing, is to discover what those wounds are and to reconcile them. So what you can do, though, is you, in terms of the parent, we want you to be able to shift your focus of your child to being that of the wounded person. Okay? It doesn't mean that you need to tell them they're wounded, but when we can look at a person in terms of their behavior being a result of their wounding, then we have a greater empathy for them. We have a greater compassion for them. And we realize what their real need is. It's not for them to change the way they think or feel about their gender. It's really to help them to find a place of healing and resolution within themselves. So this is what we're going to be focusing on in this series of Healing in Action, is what steps, what focus, what attention you can take as a parent that's going to make a difference, that's going to result in a healing process that goes on in your child. You see, you do have an influence. However, your influence to change your child is not based on controls of them. It's not based on them thinking correctly or thinking the way that you'd like them to, or even biblically. They will not be able to do that as long as they are carrying these wounds in themselves. So that's it for today. Thank you for joining me. Please remember, there's always hope for you and your family.